All right, AP students, we're looking at our vocab here in the packet. If we see right here, there it is. We are looking at Greco-Roman philosophy, mostly Greco-Roman, talking a lot about Hellenistic, which is what we're going to talk about, the Hellenistic beliefs. Let's start off with our first word, which is philosophy. Now, philosophy is believing in more logical and rational thought. It's not a religious belief. It doesn't really tie God to it. It's trying to find out more about the natural world, what's going on, by asking deep questions and thinking about it. It's not quite science. It's not the scientific method or anything like that quite yet. Philosophy is more like asking deep questions, trying to find answers. It's rational. It's using scientific thought. This was used by the Greeks. Very important, has a lot of significance because this kind of thought, philosophy, gets passed on through Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and spreads in the Hellenistic world, and even goes places as far as India. And definitely will play a big factor because the Romans will take on a lot of this philosophy, and it will be, again, Hellenistic, which means basically the Greeks started it. Our next person is Socrates, not Socrates, but Socrates. Socrates is a Greek philosopher, kind of seen as kind of like the founder of Greek philosophy. Socrates will basically influence and teach Plato, who will then teach Aristotle, who actually will then teach Alexander the Great, and will spread this philosophy to many different parts of the world. So Socrates was really known for asking a lot of questions and questioning authority, looking in the natural world for answers. He questions authority so much that he ends up having to kill himself. The authorities basically kill him. They make him drink hemlock, which is poisonous, and he dies because he makes a lot of people mad. He's very significant because his beliefs in philosophy get spread on to other people, again, like Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great learns about it, and it spreads to many other parts of the world, again, as far as India, as we'll learn as the Hellenistic world spreads. Next, we'll talk about the Socratic method. The Socratic method is a way of thinking and instructing that involves a lot of questions, and it comes from Socrates. This has been used quite a while in your guys' world literature classes last year, but it's basically the teacher does not give the answer. There are many questions, and you have to rule things out. And it's basically a way to get people to think philosophically about things, to ask questions, to engage people, to bring out curiosity, to do more critical thinking. It's definitely historically significant. It plays a huge role in Greek philosophy, Hellenistic thought, that will spread to many other parts of the world. This is basically a foundation of what we call Western thinking, which starts with the Greeks and their philosophy. All right, our next word is Plato. No, not Play-Doh. I said Plato. Ugh. There we go. All right, our next word is Plato. Plato was a pupil or a student of Socrates who kind of advanced his teachings. He mentioned Socrates many, many, many times in his work. Plato is very famous for his work called The Republic, which inside of it has the allegory of the cave, which we'll be learning about, which questions reality and the things that are around you, and how we shouldn't just think everything we see and perceive is reality, but there's many things that are deeper that we don't even know about. Again, he was a philosopher, spread Western Greek philosophy based on logic. He's also known for starting his school called the Academy, where they taught more about Greek philosophy, questioning, using nature, which eventually was used in a lot of the architecture as well, trying to base things on nature, using rational angles and everything. Significant because he spreads like the learning of Socrates to many more people. The Republic and the Allegory of the Cave are still read to this day, and as Hellenism spreads, Plato's works will spread with them into the Roman Empire and beyond. Our next word on our list is the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave is by Plato. You can find it in the Republic. The allegory of the cave is Plato trying to describe to people that just what you see and what you perceive is not always what is real. So Plato, when he was writing the allegory of the cave, was trying to explain how there are things that are beyond our perception, beyond what he can see. So you're going to watch a video on this that'll explain it better, but basically there are people who are chained. They can't see anything. They can see only ahead of them, which is basically shadows on a wall, and they think that's what's going on in the world. That's all they've ever seen. They've never seen anything else outside of the cave or anything, so they're trapped in this little cave, can't see anything. The main point is that there's something else out there. One of them eventually gets to leave, goes outside, sees everything that's in the world, but when he tries to explain it to the people who've only seen shadows on a wall, they have no idea what he's talking about. And they're like, he's crazy. And he tries to set them free, and they don't even want to be set free. They want to stay where they are. Biggest thing you need to know about Allegory of the Cave. It's by Plato. He's a philosopher. It's expressing that there are things beyond what we can see and what we can perceive, and sometimes that is just beyond us, and it's hard to explain those things to someone who can't see them. It's also a little bit elitist because Plato's a philosopher, and he's saying, us philosophers can see all this other stuff and do all these other things that you can't. So there'll be a great video on it if you don't quite have that down, and we'll discuss it more in class because it's going to take me more than 2 minutes to describe this. All right, let's get to our next word. All right, Aristotle. So let's talk about Aristotle right now. Aristotle was another Greek philosopher. You have your chain in command, your chain of, in order, it goes Socrates, Plato, then Aristotle. Aristotle was educated by Plato. He is also very famous for having taught Alexander the Great. And because Alexander the Great basically takes over so many countries and takes over so much shit, he spreads the Greek philosophy to many, many other people. So, logic, reasoning, again, are very important. Aristotle is more famous for what he inspired than what he actually thought, because a lot of what Aristotle thought has actually been proven wrong. But he inspired a lot of people, which led to things like the scientific method happening later with the philosophy. It's like you question, you want to know how things work. The Greeks didn't really do science with it, but that'll happen later on when people read the Greek works and they're influenced by it. So Aristotle will bring up ideas and questions which lead to people then testing it in a scientific method later. Here we have the scientific method. We're going to go back to this a little later in the year when we get to it. We're going to look at the Greeks and the scientific method. The Greeks and the scientific method were really good at purpose, stating the problem. They were really good at making hypotheses about it and questioning it. They did a little bit of experimentation on it, trying to eliminate things. They didn't really get to the research, analysis, and conclusion part. So, Greeks bringing up ideas, asking questions about things, thinking about it, but didn't really do so much the research. Their questioning, however, will lead further people to do the scientific method. Yes, scientific method. So that's the historical significance, is pretty much they inspire other people like the Muslim scholars in the future to do more of the scientific method, which will then later go to Europe. So again, they inspire other people like Muslims in the future who will bring us the scientific method. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is we're going to do right next. So we're going to get right into the next part here in the same video. Now we're looking at part 2, artistic expression and architecture. So let's get to our first word. All right, so here's our first word, Dionysus. Dionysus, I might be saying that wrong, but Dionysus, he is a god in the Greeks' pantheon. That means a whole bunch. Pantheon of gods. So, why is he a big deal? He's associated with theater, he's associated with wine, and having a good time. This was basically the theater guy who a lot of like Greek plays were based on him. Whenever he's brought up, he's usually got a glass of wine in his hand. Sometimes he has like 2 or 3 girls, 4 or 5 girls around with him. He is the god of theater. He is the god of partying. He is the god of having a good time. So he becomes a big-time god for Greek theater. So significance, why is this important? Because Greek theater spreads, and Greek theater goes to a lot of other places after again. Oh, what's his name? The guy that spreads Hellenistic culture. That great guy. Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great spreads Hellenistic culture, and Greek theaters spread with it. There's even like these cults of Dionysus who are basically little followers of him as a god. So, god of theater. Many plays were made after him. also spreads to many other cultures, and you'll see many theaters go beyond Greece, as we'll see in some of our videos. This Hellenistic culture spreads. Alexander the Great. This guy was a very, very, very good general who took over a whole crap load of land. And he's most known for taking over a whole crap load of land and spreading Hellenistic culture. He had a huge-ass empire that he was able to spread. He wasn't Greek, he was from Macedonia, but he liked Greek culture a lot, and he wanted the Greek culture, so he was able to defeat all the way the Persian Empire and take over this, again, huge-ass empire, and spread Hellenistic culture. His teacher was Aristotle, who definitely taught him about Greek culture, Greek philosophy, a brilliant warrior. So brilliant, in fact, that we're going to talk about him in 2 chapters. So people come up in 2 chapters, you know they're important. As far as badasses in history go, this guy's near the top. He's right up there with Genghis Khan as one of the biggest badasses that we're going to learn about. So his dad was King Philip II, who started taking over basically a lot of Greece in this area. He became a general and continued it, took over, died. His empire died and was given away to other people. But Hellenistic culture went with him. So that's Alexander the Great. For our purposes, Bactria is going to be a word that we're going to use as a land area that Hellenistic culture influenced, but also Buddhism. So we get this area of like Greco-Buddhism synthesis or combining. So you have things from Greece, things from Buddhist culture, they come together, they synchronize together, and it becomes a combined culture in this area and becomes its own kingdom for a while. Even because it's called the Kushan Empire for a while. Sounds pretty comfortable. Get it? Okay. Anyway, Greco-Roman ideas spread. This is a culture where we'll start seeing Buddha wearing a Greek toga and things like that on different monuments and architecture. So it becomes a mix of architecture, art, and style of Buddhism and the Greeks. Koine is a Greek language, very similar to Greek, that spreads in the Hellenistic world. If you don't have that word Hellenistic down yet, I'm going to have to hurt you. I have a sword. Do you see it back there? Know what Hellenistic means. Okay, so Koine is basically a Greek language that spreads with Hellenistic culture into areas like Bactria. The Torah eventually gets written in this language, which leads to a spread of Judaism, and even more so Christianity later on. But Koine is a trade language, and if you learn how to speak this language, you can trade over what was Alexander the Great's empire at that time, because he took over so much land, because Greek becomes a major trade language, and a language, Koine, if you speak it, is close enough to Greek that people start using that as a trade language. Trade languages are big, obviously. Today, English is a big trade language. Koine was an international trade language in the past. Last part of the vocab here, let's get to it with shamanism. This is part 3, shamanism. Shamanism is basically, it's not a religious belief. It's a belief that there are individuals who can get more touch with the natural world around them and get the spirituality from the world around them. Sometimes it involves going into a trance where they are then able to give advice to other people on what to do. And many non-traditional cultures outside of the classical era of Hinduism, Judaism, Confucianism, adapt the practice of shamanism. It kind of slowly goes away, but it is existent in many different parts of the world at this time. Animism is related to shamanism. We see a definition there. I'll paraphrase it. A belief that nature has a soul, that all living things and objects have a soul to them. This is kind of significant because many different parts around the world believe in this, from West Africa to the Americas to parts of Asia, in Europe, that every little thing had a soul and that all of it is part of like a same consciousness. So animism was in many different parts, the belief that nature and everything in it has a soul. Ancestor worship is the idea that you can still communicate with your ancestors, and you can pray to them, and that they can affect you in this life. It still is associated with Taoism and other religions in China and other places around the world, and it existed outside of a lot of our traditional religions that we talked about, and still exists in many places to this day. Oracle bones were the belief that you could take like a turtle shell, you could write a question on it, and you could bake it, and it would give you an answer to your problems. was used many times in the past and still even used many times up until this day in some places. That basically a wise person could take an oracle and could read it from the bones that they would see.